Hey everybody, welcome to ABA Inside Track's Nudge Book Club preview version. Yes, this is a shortened version of our full 2-hour book club podcast, all on the book Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein. Now, for those of you who are newer to the show or you haven't heard about our book clubs, we do one of these about once per season, so that's about every 3 months or so. And these are special locked episodes for our patrons on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track at the $10 or up level. It's kind of a way for us to discuss a book that's related to behavior analysis, or in this case, that's sort of kind of a cousin of behavior analysis. And we spend a lot longer than we would on a normal episode going through the book in as much detail as we think the listeners can stomach. But, in this case, I think as much as relevant to the field of behavior analysis, as this isn't a pure behavior analytic book. And we put that out. And if you're joining us on our patron feed, then you're able to earn 2 CEs for listening to this episode for no additional cost. If you're listening to this preview, it's just a chance to get a sense of what these episodes are like because, hey, maybe you'd like to join us over there on Patreon. We have a lot of other cool bonuses as well, such as our upcoming live episode. We have some special Q&As planned this year, and then discounts to the CE store, in addition to some extra CEs for things like the book club. And if you subscribe at the $20 level, like our listeners Alan and Victoria do, you can actually join in the book club, which I'll be honest, makes our lives a lot easier because so far everyone who's joined us in our book club has had such brilliant things to say. So it's very exciting. So you'll get to hear a little bit of that in the preview. If you're like, this preview was fun and I'll wait, we do unlock these about a year after they come out, and then if you're able to listen to it then. So if you can be super duper patient, I suppose you can wait until 2023 to listen to this. But for the rest of you, enjoy this preview and then maybe think about heading on over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track for more information. Anyway, without further ado, we hope you enjoy our brief preview where we discuss sort of our general thoughts and kind of get into the beginnings of the book Nudge. Everybody, welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, for this special book club edition. And we've got a number of people in the virtual studio tonight to talk about behavior analysis and behavior analytic adjacent topics, say a behavior analytic adjacent book. And who's here? Who do we have here joining us for the book club tonight?
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
And it's me, Jackie.
And who else do we have? We have other special guests.
Hey, it's me, Alan Haberman, BCBA now.
That's right. If you were like, who's this guy that keeps talking in all the book clubs? He's so smart. He must be a BCBA. Well, no, he wasn't. He fooled you, but now he is. So it's all good. And we have another special guest. Hey.
Hey, Rob, I'm Victoria.
Victoria, first-time joiner of the book club. I was going to say the circle, but it's like a square because we're on Zoom right now. So thank you. So Victoria, thank you so much for joining us, for subscribing, and then for coming to talk about the book that we'll be talking about that I haven't introduced yet. Victoria, for your first time on, do you want to say a few words about yourself to the listeners out there?
Sure. I'm a recent BCBA. I got my certification back in June. I'm very passionate about the field. I'm already looking at PhD programs, and I love this field. I feel like the moment I got into it, I was in love, and it was just like I found my tribe. So I'm loving it. I've loved talking behavior analysis, so I feel like this is a perfect forum, and I'm excited for today.
Oh, well, I hope you keep that excitement for the
for this book, not as much this book as some of the other content you guys have had on before, but still excited.
It's a great time to join. Well, everyone, I think we're dodging around it, but we are talking this episode about I don't know if it's not really a classic, but it's sort of become this like instant hit, Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. And this was sort of like the hotness in the behavioral economics field. And I think it became even hotter because Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize for economics like 2-3 years ago, I think, maybe a little bit farther back than that. So kind of a recent Nobel laureate. And we had done an episode on sustainability. And for our on the Patreon page, we said, let's do votes about books about, changing the world or improving society. And so Nudge was one of our choices. And it was the winner of the poll. And I think at the time, I don't know about all of you, but I know I'd read the Nudge second edition, and we'd kind of put it back in the poll because there was a third edition, a final edition, they call it, that came out just this past year. And Richard Thaler was on Freakonomics and telling everyone like, oh, it's the last time we're going to update this version. And, we'll get into a little bit of that when we talk a little bit of the book's history. And we thought, you know what? Behavioral economics, behavior analysis, there's so much in common there. I think we should branch out a little bit, and we'll talk about Nudge. This book's been such a hit. Because I'd read it back in, I don't know, like the early 2010s, I think, and I had really enjoyed the second edition. And coming back to read it now, I don't know why I thought that. So that's my personal background on Nudge. How about the rest of you? Is this a first time read for everyone? Has people read it before, heard about this book?
I didn't have any idea who the authors were, and I didn't look at who the authors were before I opened the book, because that's the kind of reader I am. And I'm like, who do they keep talking about when they would like give the last names? And I was like, I am so confused. And I even like Googled the names of the authors, and then like the book came up and I was like, oh yeah. So I could have just turned to the front page and see that they were referring to themselves in the book. But I actually
Thaler loves Diet Coke. But Sunstein loves red wine.
Yeah, and I was like, who's Thaler? And I was like, put the book down, opened up my computer. So that was awkward.
So the big twist of Nudge for you, Jackie, was that the authors were in the book the whole time.
They were the main characters. No, and I had never read the book, nor had I really heard of the book, nor did I have any interest reading the book. So this one was an exciting one for me, but I did like the cover of the three little elephants. So I was like, it's going to be good. It's going to be great. I'm excited to read it. And you know what? In the beginning, I really was like, I'm in it to win it. And then I started petering out a little bit. But I finished it.
That's good. I'm glad you finished it to come to your own book club. Thank you, Jackie. What a pro.
You're welcome. You're welcome very much.
Alan, Victoria, what about you? Was this a new read for either of you, for both of you?
This was definitely a new read for me. I actually listened to the audiobook just because it's a lot like how I take in books. I read so much on a daily basis. And like I just rest my eyes listening to it. Like it was interesting taking it in that way versus without the visuals, because I ended up wanting to get an extra, like a physical copy so I could actually see the visuals they were talking about. Because like a lot of audiobooks, most audiobooks have like a accompanying like little like workbook or something to kind of give you the extra stuff that you don't have because you're listening to it.
Like when you get the lyrics book with the CD.
And they didn't provide that with this one. So I had to go get a copy, which I'm going to return on Amazon after we're done. Just so I could see the visuals.
Okay. Alan, how about you?
Yeah, I had heard of it. Obviously, winning the Nobel Prize, that makes you a staple in the field. And obviously all the like, don't mess with Texas ecology stuff that gets mentioned heavily is sort of noteworthy and will come up when you talk about ABA or behavior analysis outside of what we are normally associated with. But I never really read it before. And, it's better than Carnegie, but I'm still going to assign it to like the final edition can go on that shelf and definitely need to talk about it. But I did not care for this book.
Yeah. How about you, Diana? You got this for me.
I was excited to put this back on the list for the book club choices. And I was very excited when it won the book club choice because I really like Freakonomics. Like really like that book, and I thought that I was going to really, really love this book, and I still am shocked by how much I did not enjoy reading this book.
You were really struggling. I got to see it live,
and I was like, I'm going to be a behavioral economist. Like I was like ready to like switch tracks. I was like, Nudge is going to do it for me. I am so excited to like have this whole area like explained, and I still feel kind of murky about like what happened in portions of the book.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the, it's a behavioral economics book, but it is written for the masses, which I think does lend itself to, if you're a behavioral scientist and you're interested in what's all the behavioral economics they're always talking about. This isn't, I don't know if I'd recommend this as sort of a starter point, but it is very understandable in that regard. The second edition, I would say more so than the final edition, which I think really gave up a lot of the anyone can learn this sort of narrative that the final edition I don't think had.
Okay.
But again, that's my
Anyone
opinion.
Can
I only read one of them. I've read both of them in my lifetime. I only read one of them in preparation for this book club. I apologize. I didn't go back and reread the second edition and then read the final edition. So I skimmed it for about 40 minutes to try to remember why I liked the second edition, and if it was just when I read it, or if there was something different about the writing or the content. And I do think there was, but well, we can get into that discussion. So that's kind of the start of it. So again, we're already kind of giving away the ending. We weren't all huge fans of this book. Were there some interesting concepts in there? Was there, I think, content interesting to behavior analysts in terms of how do we take more complex behavior analytic principles and sort of de-jargonize them into somewhat complex, but easier, I think, to understand for the layperson terms? Yeah, I think so. And then the book kind of goes off a cliff in the second half and doesn't do a lot of, I think, what I know I liked from the second edition, which was actually practical uses of nudge versus, hey, let's do a lecture on boring economic principles that nobody wanted to listen to when they bought this book, I'm guessing.
Yeah, because I think we want to be careful in our discussion here on separating what are the kernels of interesting behavioral economics that we can pull from this book that our audience would probably enjoy hearing about, versus what I kept thinking about when I was reading the book is, why is it not working for me as a piece of writing? Because I think that's two different things. And there is good stuff in here that we as behavior analysts, maybe agree with, but haven't ever thought about, right? And allow us to take that over into our world and, talk about it in our terms. I think there's a lot to pull from it. But I don't know. I'm not sure the progression from book 2 to book 3, what happened. But it's like a different discussion. Yeah.
I think my guess would be that Thaler is engaging in a conversation and trying that, like the idea of a final edition is like, I'm putting the capstone on what nudge is supposed to be with this. So I think that's where a lot of the more arcane lecture-y type of economics comes in. And also, it's funny, that wasn't what my problem with the book was. It's often just about sort of the nature of that conversation and who are having those conversations about like economists and economic theory and how nudge fits into the market landscape, the reality that we live in. Mm. So I think that's probably, my guess is that's where the weakness comes from, is that he's trying to keep that accessible piece, but also talk to economists and be like, I don't like what you're doing here with my baby.
It could be.
No, I think there was some talk to almost to critics. Like you could hear it in a number of different areas. Where I'm talking to the critics here. Like all the different times where this is something that was in my last book. You guys criticized it. Now I'm going to address it here. I'm like, oh, okay.
Right. Here's my opinion. There was something here was our opinion in the first book. And then you obviously didn't read the first book well enough because that's not what we said. So let us clarify.
There's the organ donations chapter.
Right? Yeah, the organ donations chapter was big on that. And there was another chapter as well.
Well, the whole last section, there was in the second edition, there was a section on what do people not like about nudges. And that read very much like what might be some misperceptions, which I think are ones that behavior analysts hear all the time of I don't bribe my kids, or reinforcement. That's, I used it and it didn't work. Like those misunderstandings. I don't want anyone to tell me how to change my behavior. Like we're in a vacuum where your learning history is irrelevant to the behavior you engage in. But I think it did take a tone. Again, I didn't reread the full section from the second edition, but I think the third one did have a little bit more of a tone of, guess what, everybody? I won a friggin' Nobel Prize. So here's what I think of all your criticisms. Which, I mean, to be honest, if I won a Nobel Prize, I would write a chapter in anything I'd written and be like, everyone, if you ever said something mean to me, here's the chapter where I call you out because you're a dum-dum and I won a Nobel Prize. So
hilarious, because you totally would, Rob.
I'd be the worst. I just get up there and be like, I just want to get this is for all the haters out there who didn't think I deserved this Nobel Prize for chemistry because of my lack of qualifications or understanding of chemistry. Well, what do you think of me now, jerks?
And I think another thing that informed sort of my perception and sort of interaction with the book is that I was 21 when the first one came out. So like my formative years have been one of being nudged all the time and recognizing some of what the other talked about, is talking about, etc. And I really hate a lot of those aspects of modern life. Mm. And so I'm like, great, I can blame this guy. Or at least the people that took his ideas and then just ignored the whole like morality component, which is important for us as behavior analysts to like remember, because that's a conversation we engage in to this day about we introduce
exactly
a tool, a technology, but with this ethical component, but people are like, oh, ethics, that makes it like not profitable. And then do X, Y, and Z with what our tools and are very awful human beings sometimes.
I think one thing I would say for Thaler and Sunstein is they do have a very narrow definition, I think, of what a nudge is and is not. And rereading it, the first sections especially, I think it was helpful to sort of redefine their idea of a nudge, because I think what most people think of as a nudge, which we should probably define that term pretty soon, but they would say is a misuse of what they meant in the original book. But again, just like any sort of genie in a bottle situation, if you put out this idea, who's going to take the idea? Well, you're hoping, it's the people who want to benefit society. But in our capitalistic culture, it's probably going to be the people who are like, how can I make money off of people's behavior patterns? And how can I do it in a way that they don't know it's happening? Or even if they did know it's happening, they wouldn't care, or they think it is helpful in some way. And I would become richer by doing it. And to some extent, to a huge extent, that's not what a nudge is meant to do. But again, it's not something just like reinforcement. Like you can use reinforcement in all sorts of different ways. It doesn't mean you're going to use it for good. You use it however you choose to use it. And, we have ethical requirements about how we would or would not, what's a harmful reinforcer. If you're a business person or even a government agent, you don't necessarily have that same code of ethics you are following, or the ethical code you follow is not the same. So you may think very little of using this technology to change behavior in ways that I think Thaler and Sunstein would say, that's not really a nudge. That's coercive, or that's doing something for your own gain. But what do they care? What do I care? I'm the business person. I want to call it a nudge, and people like that
business
term.
People that would disagree
with
your characterization.
Diana. I've been radicalized.
Person.
They're all the mean high executive people of the Hallmark movies that then lose their girlfriend and boyfriends when they move out to the country. That's who you're talking about, right, Rob?
Yep, that's it. It only took me 20 years after college to become really radicalized. I don't know why I decided now.
Right, but I think what you're talking about really, moves us into the introduction when they talk about choice architects, right? Mm-hmm. Because they give a great example of someone, I think her name was Chloe. I can't remember. Was it Chloe? If I was, I'm like,
she's a cafeteria. It's a hypothetical cafeteria worker.
But her name was Chloe, I think.
Named Chloe.
Yes. Right. And she has a master's degree, and her idea was looking at where food placement would go in the cafeteria, right? On whether children would be more likely to eat the healthy food that was in front of them versus on the bottom shelf versus top shelf. So I think that bringing in that concept of choice architect, I think, is an important thing that you've kind of segued us in, right? Because not all business people are out to make money, but they're the architects of how we are choosing in our environment, right? Because those are the variables that are there. And I think when we talk about choice architects, we're really looking at the salient cues in the environment that may make it more or less likely that our behavior is going to be emitted under those features.
I found it strange that they didn't call the book The Choice Architect, because so much more of it was about the idea of choice architecture, with nudge being a tool in the belt of the architect, about the individual who's responsible to organize some context or set up systems that help people or hinder people from making meaningful decisions, and the idea that anyone who sets up a system, which I think would apply to all of us, you get to be a choice architect, at least in some component of your job. And depending on how you set things up, there's no neutral, it's just you're setting things up to make things easier or harder. Some behaviors are easier, some responses are harder. And that's your responsibility as the choice architect. And then nudge is one thing you can do as a choice architect.
Well, I think in that first section, they're also talking about all the different ways she could structure that, and like how they speak to how you could do it with profits as your motive. Like she could absolutely use the stuff we're talking about to drive profits by the people who are going to give them the most money to get those food placements that are going to get them the most exposure and the most choice of most people choosing them. And then they're like, what we're talking about is the fact that we want to do good. Like they're like, we're pointing to the fact that in many of these cases, if we talk about it from a moral angle, we want you to encourage you to use this knowledge for good. And in this case, this cafeteria designer putting those foods in the right places to encourage good eating is the moral decision to them. And that's what they're kind of like. Like this is the good way to use our science, and there are many other ways you could use it, but this is what we're trying to get at. So kind of trying to bring it back to, all right, this is our perspective, and this is how we're trying to kind of direct you into reading of the actual like science in the text going forward.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you brought that up, Victoria, because I think, again, as behavior analysts, we have to be mindful too, right, that whoever the choice architecture lives in their own history of reinforcement and their own context, right? And it may not necessarily be the same as those that are choosing or on the choosing end, right? So I think that's one point that they didn't really bring up, right? Which behavior analysts and behavior analysis can kind of fulfill that, right? It's verbal behavior is only verbal behavior, right? And good and bad in terms of our, community in which we're in. So Chloe, our choice architect at school, may say, oh, yeah, these are really great things to eat, right? But that's based on her own verbal community and her own knowledge base, right? And it may not necessarily represent the people that are choosing. So I wish that would have been in there a little bit. And they alluded to it slightly, Alan, right? But not as much as they wanted to.
No, so I actually was curious about like sort of what sort of the public policy side, and I found a really good article from 2018, Theory Nerd, I'm sorry, that there's a really good operational definition, and it's that there's nudges, there's sort of three components: that it's an intervention that interferes with the choice conditions minimally, that's an intervention that uses rationality failures instrumentally, that is sort of acknowledges that people need help in choosing what's best for them sometimes. But then there's this third component that gets left out often, which is that it's a welfare promoting intervention that tries to reduce the negative effects of rationality failures. And that's a really important part. I like that, welfare promoting. And it goes into their idea of the paternalism. They're
libertarian paternalism.
Libertarian paternalism.
We'll come back to that term. Yeah.
But that idea that there is an inherent assumption that this is welfare promoting in what Thaler is talking about when he's defining nudges.
Yeah. So choice architecture is the giant umbrella. You could be a choice architect and do evil. You could be a choice architect and do good. It's just the idea that you have some sort of a position of power. You are setting up systems in which people must make decisions in those systems, and you are able to influence their behavior based on, human principles of behavior, human patterns of behavior. Then we get into the idea of the nudge as a tool. And like Alan, like you said, and like Thaler and Zunstein say in the book, the nudge is really setting up the choice architecture in a way that is going to promote human welfare, that is going to alter people's behavior in a predictable way. There's no forbidding. It's not about using incentives or changing economic incentives. It's not about taxes or fines. It's about setting up choices in a way that should benefit the individual based on the individual's perception of whether their choice did benefit them. So it's welfare. So if you nudge someone and they say, "Oh, the situation I'm in, I'm mad that I'm in this situation," by definition, it wouldn't be a nudge. Just like it's like, "Oh, I reinforced their behavior," and then the rates of behavior go down. You didn't actually reinforce any behavior. I think it's kind of that same concept.
Like stimulus, basically, you're manipulating the stimulus conditions in the environment, and essentially, like that's what most of the stuff they're talking about is like we are manipulating the environment, and these are the effects that we've seen in these large group studies.
Mm. Yeah. So we've got nudge, we've got choice architecture, and then the other term that Alan you mentioned that they talk about is libertarian paternalism, which they themselves. I heard Richard Thaler talking in on Freakonomics when the third edition came out, and I think they hate this term. I kind of wish they'd been like, "Wait, this term's stupid. We're going to change it completely," because when we talk about libertarianism, I think of just do whatever you want to do. When I think of paternalism, I think of like Big Brother from 1984 telling me what I have to do. So there are two terms that do not sound like they want to help me, or they are interested in my welfare so much as they just want me to make my own decisions, or they want to tell me what to do. Which
I feel like, on Kimmy Schmidt, when they tried to pick the name of the football team that would anger the most people so that they would either buy the merchandise to wear or buy the merchandise to burn.
Oh, like the Washington gun takers?
The Washington gun takers. I feel like libertarian paternalism ignites that within me. And it probably does for like 90% of the population hates that term for one or the other reason.
But to be fair, I thought when I read that and they were like, everybody hates this, but we're still going to use it. You know what? I felt a parallel to behavior analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because everybody hates our terminologies. There's been tons and tons and tons and tons of research saying that people don't like how you're talking to them, and yet we still do it.
That doesn't mean we're right,
we should do it.
It means we're stubborn. And we didn't win a Nobel
Prize. He's sticking to his guns. Like they're sticking to their guns. Like these are our term. You take it or leave it. Like this is what we're going to use. So get used to it.
See, I will defend. I don't like the libertarian paternalism as a name is awful, but I do like that they've chosen a like construct, just like we have parsimony and all of those wonderful like foundational things that we talk about as a test. They've said, listen, this is we're going to have a system that's paternalistic, meaning helping people do what's better for them. Welfare promoting, but there is this element of someone else is doing this for the most part. But then libertarian, meaning that like it's still based on choice. It's still based on like motivation. There's no coercion. And you're right that those terms are very loaded, unfortunately, but they seem to be very specific to like the public policy economic side of things.
Right.
So I think that's where you kind of have to be forgiving of that, and that they're using that just like we sometimes get very jargony. They're talking to a very specific audience when they're saying that this is the feature of like choice architecture and the nudge is that it's founded on libertarian paternalism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wish they would have called it maternalistic. Just change it around a little bit. They are still two white dudes.
Yeah.
Right? It's a lot of white dudes, right?
Yes, exactly.
No, and I think you would actually have a better like result as far as people's interpretation of it, because there's a more positive association with that particular term. Like when you think maternal and like maternal, like people, mothers changing your behavior with their little nudges, like, and it plays with nudge really well too, if you think about it.
Yeah.
There was an air high five that happened.
Yeah. I think paternalism has a different connotation in terms of like, paternalism is like father knows best. You got to do what your dad says. Maternalism is like your mother cares about you. She's saying these things because she knows it will help you. Yeah.
Right. So they should have, especially.
Is there a non-gender term just for parent?
Libertarian personalism. Sure. I don't know.
Or
guardianism? Parentalism?
Oh. Neither of those are good.
And I think in economics, again, maternalism has this idea of policies about motherhood as something in our society that has long been ignored. And so we're going to have like maternalist policies because like the relationship of like the mother and the child is something in public policy, whereas paternalism just has that idea of an extreme version being a nanny state.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so again, we're sort of in this world of very specific use that gets very shady.
It's not translating well outside the field.
And I agree too. And I agree, but I'm just saying like a slight shift would have appealed to the masses, just like slight shifts in our language as behavior analysts appeals better to greater communities than if we always
like when Ogden Lindsley did the research on like these other terms, and I think people are going to like these terms better than the terms we're using. So let's like use these terms.
Right.
And said, don't tell me what to do, Dad.
Yeah, and maybe this is just one of those places where he's not talking to the masses. He's talking to economists, because he does introduce this after the concept of like the cafeteria. He was just like, oh, here's my nice metaphor. By the way, you people in my field, this is what I'm talking about. Pay attention.
Right. And number one, don't mix the books. That's what I just want to say. Right. If you're going to make a layperson book, make a layperson book. If you're going to make an economist book, make addendum.
That is a challenge. Yeah. The second edition, I remember reading it. It felt like it was a book for readers. Anyone who was not and they even talk about this term, the econ. You know, you're not an econ or economist. You are just someone who wants to learn more about this field. Like the breakdown of the chapters are much shorter. They have better headers. So I felt very guided through my reading. There's chapters just on like, here are some nudges you can use in your everyday life. Whereas this book, chapters just went on and on and on. The headers were very unhelpful. There were just sections where I was like, I think I must have missed the chapter on the basics of home refinancing and mortgages. And it stressed me the hell out reading it. And I was very angry.
No, and that's exactly what I thought I was missing. Like I was missing the practical applications. Like I was coming in thinking like, okay, they're giving me all this great like setup. Like, and then like practical application, almost nada. Like where is it? Like it was upsetting. That's why I wasn't very satisfied at the end. It's like you finished a meal and you're still hungry. Like what just happened? Like I just ate, but there's still like this emptiness inside.
It definitely, the final edition probably should have been like Nudge, 3.5 version. Like, oh, it's like the expansion pack. Like read the original Nudge and then get this one. And it's like short. It's like a little pamphlet DLC. Or something. But you download this one to your Kindle and it gives you extra content. If you love the original Nudge, be like an expert on Nudge. Like you need like the bonus levels, so like only the hardcore, economists and nudgers and choice architects in the world can read. And then it would have been fine because I would have understood the context. But as I read it, I was like, I don't care about half the topics. I was like so excited. We're talking about nudges and sustainability. And they're like, no, we're not going to talk about nudges and sustainability. We're going to talk about cap and trade economics. Like, no, thank you. Not why I bought this book. Not what I want to talk about. Not related to our field.
And that probably goes back to he's won a Nobel Prize at this point. Like and I don't even think it's like self-aggrandizing. I think he sees, I really got the vibe that they're like, we don't like where this is going and what we're associated with. That's not what we're talking about. So all of those like day-to-day mundane things that we talked about, those are still true. Go back and read that. Like if they just said, go back and read the old edition. Right. This is about like how our ideas are being applied to at the nation state level and at the corporate level. And you people, the audience needs to know. And so maybe that's also part of it is that they decided to combine them because there's that, again, that informed consent of like, you need to know where my ideas have been applied and misapplied. So again, maybe I can, I do this all the time. I don't like the book, but then I'll defend it to high heaven.
It was like a false lead. Like it was a false lead because they're like in the introduction, they're saying, this is what we were doing in the past. This is what changed in this one. Basically, we're updating those things that are necessary to update as if you're still getting the same thing you got in the last one. And we're just adding stuff that makes it more relevant to today. Whereas I feel like if I went back and read the second one from what you guys, your impressions in the beginning from those of you who read the second one, I'd get a totally different vibe from that one than I did from this.
Yeah, it's a hazy memory. I guess the key component in the introduction and the concepts we want to get over. We don't like libertarian paternalism. I don't know if they like libertarian paternalism as a term. But in terms of the concept, it's that people should be allowed to choose And the choice architect's job should be to help them make the choices that they as individuals, the individuals themselves would have made if they had unlimited knowledge, unlimited time,
what's in their best
unlimited
interest,
information,
right?
Complete self-control. So, if we could always make the decisions that would benefit us and we knew they'd benefit us in the future, we'd make those decisions. But that's not how humans work. We go for the reinforcer that's larger sooner than,
smaller sooner,
larger later. Yeah, we always go for those. Well, we certainly go for the larger sooner as well, I think, Dinah.
I do.
If I'm going to get it now, I want it to be big. I want a big candy bar now.
And I think that also that the choice architect doesn't benefit from those choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like they touch on that, but that's a big thing that I think that they really wanted to sort of highlight in multiple places and perhaps weren't as successful.
Yeah.
A good choice architect, like the nutritionist, she's designing like a cafeteria to help children make better choices, not so that she, as like the president of NutriCorp, can have like the most profitable company when it comes to school lunches.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like putting the sugar cereal on the bottom shelf so that all the kids see it and try to grab it.
Yeah. And so that's not nudging because that's not welfare promoting.
Right.
That's manipulation.
Yeah.
Right. And the other piece I think that potentially gets lost here, but is important for us as behavior analysts to take away is there's not a scenario presented here rightfully where there is no design being put forth. Right? Because it's not the difference between a chaotic environment in which everyone has free will and then a carefully curated and designed environment that pushes people towards behaving in a certain way. There is always going to be behavior that's nudged and pushed in certain directions based on the environmental arrangement that's already present, right? So there's, even without a design to it, there's someone who is architecting the spaces in which we act and behave. So it's not the difference between we're living in this free-spirited place where we all can do whatever we want to, or we're in a situation of control. Our behavior is always under control of the environmental arrangement and the reinforcers available.
And they even say that, Diana, at one point, very, as you just said, there is no neutral design.
Nope.
Yes, right.
What I think one distinction they forget to make, but they allude to it throughout all the chapters, is looking at the design that's going to benefit the individual versus the design that's going to benefit the group, right? Because when you're looking at contingencies of reinforcement, right, that will benefit the group, they rarely benefit the individual. Science and human behavior, Skinner 1954, right? Whereas if they're designing contingencies that are going to benefit individual behavior, it's highly unlikely that then they're going to also benefit the group. So I think that's one part that they've missed a little bit, but they've alluded to it when they're talking on those grander scale things, when they're talking about more.
And we're used to thinking about behavior on the individual level, and they're likely used to thinking about behavior on the group level.
Yeah, and I mean, they do speak a little bit of, in terms of like costs, cost to society. So that probably the closest in behavior, like an economist is going to get to talking about, what is the greater good having that. There's a value. There's a dollar value to the greater good if you're an economist.
I guess for behavioral economics, there's the individual in the plural. It's economy. There's.
Right.
Thank you so much for checking out our preview of our full-length book club. If you thought 30 minutes, it's not long enough to talk about a full-length book, well, we agree. And we talked about this book for over 2 hours. However, the only way you're going to get the rest of those 2 hours is if you go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track and subscribe at the $10 or up level to get immediate access to this, plus all of our other book clubs that we've done. We've done Meaningful Differences. We've done The Other End of the Leash. We've done Neuro Tribes. We've got even more book clubs coming out throughout the year. Like I said at the beginning, we do these about once every season, as well as some other bonuses for patrons. Maybe not sure if you want to start at that level. Well, why not come join at the $3 or $5 level, where you can get access to our episodes ahead of time, as well as some discounts at the CE store and access to some other specials that we're doing this year, including live episodes and a chance to vote on our book clubs coming up in the year. Still not sure? That's okay. We've got our Meaningful Differences book club from last year that just unlocked on the free feed. So if you want a little bit more book club, but you're not sure about joining, hey, that's fine. Go check it out. And then when you think you're ready, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Well, we hope to see you all there. Maybe you can join us and Victoria or Alan at some of our future book clubs. We'd really love to see you there. But in the meantime, thank you for listening. Enjoy our normal episode coming out next week. And we'll see you then. Keep responding. Bye.